Welcome to Planetary Calendars, Astro Portraits. I'm Ralph Demetrius, one of the astrologers. Our subject today is San Francisco. It's part of our Unintended Consequences series. And it's about the fact that at the time when these places were founded, they did not know about these outer planets that were going to have a very big influence. And all the subjects we have pulled so far have had major planets, these outer planets, in significant spots in the chart. San Francisco is a perfect example of that because the sun is in Aries. There's actually 3 different charts that are considered important for San Francisco, but the one we found most significant is the one on April 15th, 1850, because that's the actual date of incorporation. Many people refer to 10 days before when the city council voted to incorporate. But that's like getting engaged. You know, you propose, she accepts, you're engaged, but until you walk down the aisle, you're not legally connected. And once you're incorporated, it's legally connected. The deed has happened. That's the chart. So April 15th, 1850, we use 12 noon for a city. In that chart, the sun is at 25 degrees Aries. Uranus, a planet discovered in the mid-1700s related to innovation, electricity, sudden changes, things like earthquakes, is at 26 degrees Aries. These two are right at the midheaven. So that's right there. It's powerful. It's implied. It's just inherent in its nature. At 28 degrees Aries is Pluto, the power of the small. Many astrologers always think of Pluto in terms of atomic power because at the time when Pluto was discovered, it was right at the time of the development of the atomic bomb. What they forget is the other thing that was developed at the same time was the modern computer. And honestly, what has affected your life more? The atomic bomb? Hopefully not. Or the development of the computer? Well, it's the computer that has affected people. It's the power of the small. In the same way that the atomic bomb is a very small thing that creates a huge change, electrons, little on and off switches inside of a computer, are able to communicate globally and unify the world in a communication network that has never existed before, that we know of. So that's the power of the small. Those 2 planets, sudden changes, electricity, the power of the small, are closely conjunct to the sun. Now, Mercury is also close to the sun at 23 degrees. So you have communication, you have, electricity, you have the power of the small, all clustered together. And yet at the time when it was founded, Uranus and Pluto were not in people's consciousness. Unintended consequences. This became a center for innovation, a center for the power of the small. Now, there's multiple different charts, but we really like this chart for one real powerful reason. First of all the charts are going to tend to have either Cancer or Leo rising, but this actually gives us Leo rising. And, Leo is where you greet, you greet the world. Well, Leo rising, that's fire rising. Well, there's the big red bridge that you see, the Golden Gate Bridge, golden, the color of Leo, the metal of Leo greets you as you arrive, Leo rising. But even more importantly, the moon position in this chart is 8 degrees Gemini. Okay, it's youthful. And it's a very young city. It's very youthful in its nature. First of all, young people like to live there because there's a lot of hills. Gemini is about walking, and of course, because of all the hills, you tend to walk every place. People tend to be very trim because you have to walk there. But also, it's conjunct the star Aldebaran. This is a very martial star. When they started ascribing this to the archangels, they ascribed Aldebaran to Michael, who was the commander of the heavenly host. It's very martial. Remember that San Francisco was the home of the Presidio. Most of the bay was consumed with military bases for many, many years. Major shipyards for building ships during the Second World War. In fact, from the Second World War, actually going all the way back to the Civil War, through the Second World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, San Francisco was a major center for soldiers going to the Pacific. And it's still significant in many, many ways in terms of the bay itself. What's interesting is that down in the second house is Jupiter. Jupiter in Virgo, okay? Jupiter in Virgo in the second house, it's your resource. Well, Jupiter is travel, so rivers, seaways, and it's not just the bay that's important, it's all the rivers that come off the bay. You can reach hundreds of miles inland into these big growing areas from the bay. It's the river system around the bay that's so significant. Besides, of course, the fantastic anchorage of the bay itself. It's the fact it's so protected. The other thing that's interesting too is Mars is at 14 degrees Cancer. Well, that's within 1 degree of the United States, 13 degrees Cancer. It's Sirius, has Vesta very close to it as well. Mars in Cancer, now it's above the horizon in the 12th house. The 12th house relates to the sea, the home by the sea, the home by the bay, right? Mars, so once again, it's martial, a lot of soldiers. San Francisco has one of the largest numbers of veterans in the country, which is kind of interesting, since people think of this land of fruit and nuts, but it's a tremendous number of veterans who live there. At Sirius, it's tremendously bright, and when you add Vesta there, it makes it brighter still. That's one of the things that happens when you put Mars and Vesta together. It supercharges it. And you get that with San Francisco. You get there, it just feels supercharged when you get there. And yet it's Mars in Cancer, the sign of the home. And it is very much a residential city. When you go around, it's all homes. And people take great pride in their homes. Now, the only other planet in this whole thing, it's kind of interesting, that of the outer planets that they didn't know about at the time, excluding the asteroids and such, because there's a lot that could be said about the asteroids and Chiron, is Neptune. Neptune, which was discovered just years before the city was founded, is in the 8th house, conjunct Ceres, which is about farming, which is funny because, the farming of kelp and farming of the sea is very, very important. And Neptune, of course, god of the sea, in the 8th house, and Pisces, the sign of the ocean. And it talks a lot about the tremendous amount of cooperation that goes on, because the 8th house is all about use of cooperative power. But I think it's also interesting that you have major planets in the 8th house and the 12th house. Mars in the 12th house, Neptune in the 8th house, right? They're both kind of hidden. Those two houses are the hidden houses. They're like behind the door. One of the things about San Francisco that's so unique about the bay is that it's so hard to find the entrance. The Spanish had sailed past the entrance hundreds of times and never seen it. It was actually during a land expedition that it was finally found, because it's so difficult to find from the ocean. Neptune in the 8th house. What's also interesting too is that the number of Neptune, because of how difficult it is to get there, I'm sure Neptune and Pisces in the 8th house, I'm sure there's a lot of shipwrecks under the water off the coast of the bay, because it is the 8th house. It's the house of life and death. Neptune, Neptune takes his toll periodically, and Ceres relates very strongly to like falling from high places. Well, if you fall from the surface to the bottom of the ocean, it's a long drop. So, fascinating chart. Uranus, Pluto, conjunct the Sun, Leo rising, Mars at Sirius, the Moon and Aldebaran. Very, very vital, very powerful, and very San Francisco. So I hope you found that interesting. This is part of our Unintended Consequences series. Come back and see us on Tuesdays for our portraits. Come and see us each Friday for our forecast. You can find them at our Planetary Calendar Astrology YouTube channel. And you can also find them at planetarycalendar.com, where, of course, you can find our calendars and books. So enjoy and be well.